If Hawaii is seen from the outside as a feminine islands, taking of the islands is connected to the idea that we can take the women. So if we hold that idea at the same time, there's all this documentation that the missionaries or the sailors, whoever, would write about how when they came into the shore, Hawaiian women were taking off their clothes, right? So they're so available. Well, actually, you cannot wear kapa in the water.
Yeah.
Hello, right? So of course they were taking it off.
Yep.
Right? So it wasn't like they were offering themselves. They were like, we gotta swim to the boat. Can we think and talk about those forms of exchange and the ways that women gained access to power by doing that? How do we think about or talk about that without sexual expression or sexuality today for Hawaiian women, but for everybody as something that we want to celebrate or do or explore rather than trying to confine it or continue to discipline in it the way that the missionaries taught us we needed to discipline it.
This episode engages Hawaiian worldviews in social contexts and explores themes of sexuality, gender, and erotics. Some language and content may be considered strong or triggering. Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Aloha mai kākou and welcome to Kūkā Kīkī, a Mahu-led podcast where we kūkā and kīkī about Kanaka sexuality, gender, erotics, and all things Mahu. This is a gathering of friends and community rooted in connection, joy, and resilience. Today, we are joined by Dr. Stephanie Lani Teves, an associate professor and chair of women's and gender sexuality studies at UH Manoa. In this Kūkā Kīkī, she reflects on the influence of kupuna and performers on her path as a scholar writing on Hawaiian gender and sexuality. She dives deep into the history and impact of colonial laws that reshaped intimacy in Hawaii and imagines new possibilities for intimacy and connection in our communities today. Aloha, Lani. Mahalo for joining us today at Kūkā Kīkī. We're super honored and excited to have you here. You are a scholar that has influenced me profoundly. I love your work. Define Indigeneity, I think, shaped my grad school experience in many ways. So thank you for joining us today. I wanted to start off with just asking about, if you can share a little bit about your Onehano, your Aina Kupuna, and then genealogies that continue to shape how you think about Pilina today.
Yeah, mahalo. O au no Lani Teves, he kama o pu'uloa, no Eva, no hano uli uli mayau. Aloha, mahalo for having me.
It's an honor.
So I'm Lani Teves. I think of myself as a child of Pu'uloa, the area between Aiea and Ewa. I grew up around there. I currently live in Ewa, kind of more towards Honouliuli area. I like to tell people I'm a child of Pu'uloa because people forget that they just call it Pearl Harbor, but that whole area used to be called Pu'uloa, and I grew up basically on the bus around that area. And it's very urbanized environment, and it really kind of shaped my kind of coming into myself. I used to catch the bus a great deal from Ewa all the way into town to kind of hang around at Ala Moana or Waikiki. I would see performers there. Coco Chandelier was a very transformative person for me as a fan. Then as a person I write about in Defiant Indigeneity, but as a performer, as well as when I later went to university, when I took courses with Kumu Hananike Trask, who was my kumu, and I wore the shirt to represent and bring her in.
Energy.
It really shaped how I think, and then also how I think about relationships. As you said, Pilina, how we pull influences and build relationships with people in all kinds of different ways. So yeah.
Yeah, mahalo for sharing. And I think that's so awesome that you got to to be a haumana of kumuhaunani ke. Just talking about yesterday with No'u, how she's basically hanau'd an entire generation or multiple generations of thinkers and scholars and community members and activists and just aloha aina in general. So to be a part of that intellectual genealogy, I think is such a blessing and an honor, and that's really awesome. For those who may be unfamiliar with the kind of work that you do, would you mind sharing with our listeners a little bit about what it is that you do currently and the kind of scholarship that you work on?
So I used to say that I research or study Hawaiian life on the fringe. I like the idea of being on the margins or on the fringes of how we think about Hawaiian or being Kanaka. Now I feel like I've kind of started to say more, I look at how Hawaiian ideas of gender and sexuality have shaped and transformed over time, and how we continue to make it different, and that we need space to make it different, as it related to our kupuna, but as it relates to us now. And so that can entail a lot of things. In the past, I looked at performers or artists or thinkers and the things they said. And I'm still doing that, but now I'm turning more towards looking at kind of people from the past, Kanaka from the past, and the things they did, the things that shaped them, including laws, which I write a lot about in the essay. So that's kind of what I've been looking at now. And so I was looking at the late 19th century and now kind of the early 20th century more so than before.
And you recently just, had published your book, your newest book. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your most recent book?
So I did an oral history project with a group of 10 kupuna who I guess I should say call themselves or see themselves as mahu, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. So kind of like the big acronym. But most of them called themselves either gay or mahu. Not as much hung up with the language that some of us might be
today.
Yeah. And so I did an oral history with them. I really wanted to talk to Kanaka kupuna who have lived to tell their stories, to document their stories, and kind of just hear what it was like for them. And I think I did it because it's a project I always wanted to do, and it was a project because I was looking for ancestors, truthfully. But the search for ancestors, as I found, is more about your desire for the search than what you will find. And maybe you know this in your own research. And so it kind of became about the process of hearing their stories and hearing all the ike that they had to share. And it's been wonderful because I feel like they're finally getting their puas, they're very happy about it. The community has been very positive, so it's great.
Oh, it's my ka'i. I mean, after years of just seeing the world change so vastly.
Yes.
Through multiple generations, I feel like, they deserve their puas after all these years of being in the community and seeing, death and celebration and all of the complexities of life from a very unique perspective, Kanaka, but also mahu or gay. So I think that's awesome. I'm really excited. I haven't yet read the book, but I will be reading it.
Yeah, there is an audio archive, I should say. So the recordings, in addition to the book, the recordings are available through the Center for Oral History.
Okay.
So we can hear their actual voices.
That's the one at UH.
At UH, yeah.
Okay.
So it's really fun to listen to them talk.
Is that something that anyone can access?
Anybody. It's available to the world. You don't need like a UH login or anything.
That's good to know. So we'll put in our show notes probably a link to that.
Put a link to it.
We can put a link to that. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome if our listeners wanted to go and listen more to these oral histories. But then in this most recent issue of No Ka Pono Ka Mahui, this Hulili special issue, you look at sex laws in the kingdom. Would you mind sharing a little bit about those laws and what they were designed for?
Yeah, so the sex laws are what they were originally called at Moe Kolohe laws, and it was a decree. Well, they say it was at first a decree by Ka'ahumanu forbidding adultery, prostitution, work on the Sabbath, that kind of stuff. It later in 1829 gets kind of like officially written by Kaʻiminaʻauao, who kind of lays it out more. And that later goes into the Hawaiian Penal Code over subsequent decades. When I first read them, I was kind of shocked by them because it's not just adultery. Sure, I think we know Hawaiians didn't have marriage in the way we see it today. So, okay, adultery, anything outside of a marriage would be seen as bad once they instituted marriage, right? But then it also included like fornication, which meant any kind of sexual activity outside of a marriage, regardless of whether you were married. So it was like 2 Kanaka or 3 or 4 or whoever, if they went off and did something or were known to have done something, they could be arrested for that. Wow. Even if they were not married to other people. Wow. And if we learn then that marriage was a rather new invention and many Kanaka had not yet been officially married, then you can see how a lot of people are suddenly getting in trouble for things.
Yes.
Right? So as that gets instituted across, the paeaina, which is difficult to institute as well as enforce, you can see a lot of confusion, a lot of transformation is occurring in this early, late 1820s, 1830s. And there are many documents of arrests and court cases, I should say court hearings of these arrests. And they came with fines. I think the fines were like $10, $20. But before there was if there was no money, you would pay hogs to the ali'i and so on. And then what it actually says in the Moe Kolohe document, and it says if it happens a third time, the ali'i can take away your land. Wow. And so that was the part that really blew me away and made me think about the big impact or speculate about what the big impact might have been then of these laws when you have people being put into this new system or maybe adopting it for themselves, right? And then you physical, sexual system or structure. And then you have capitalism coming in. And then you also have a transformation of land ownership. And population loss. Right. Forgive me for forgetting that. So it's all of this is happening. And then you have religious conversion. How has this profoundly shaped how we think about it today? Yeah,
that's heavy.
Oh.
It definitely has shaped, right, how we think about sex today. But also, you talk about in your paper too, how the sort of idea around Kanaka women, particularly in their bodies, and the mythologies that started to develop around their bodies started to take root, I think, because of these laws and sort of these, I guess, histories of different regimes coming to Hawaii and enacting power over particularly wahine. This leads into my next question. So how did these laws sort of influence the perception of Hawaiian women over time? Particularly Hawaiian women, but Hawaiians in general.
I think, so when I first started to write the essay, I didn't intend to think about prostitution because a lot of people have written about prostitution in Hawaii and its history and how that's related to a perception of the availability of Hawaiian women. That is linked, as Haunani Kumutrask wrote, is linked to the idea of the availability of Hawaii, right? So if Hawaii is seen from the outside as a feminine islands, taking of the islands is connected to the idea that we can take the women. So if we hold that idea at the same time, there's all this documentation that Hawaiian women were both willing and violently taken right? So how do we kind of reckon with that and get to a place of celebrating, if we can, celebrate their willingness? Like, should the violence not overshadow the fact that Hawaiians did have a different understanding of sexual expression?
Yeah.
Right? I recently heard a paper by a scholar, Catherine Ulep, who talked about how, the missionaries or the sailors, whoever, would write about how when they came into the shore, Hawaiian women were taking off their clothes, right? So like they're so available.
Right.
But what she wrote, which kind of like blew my mind, she was like, well, actually, you cannot wear kapa in the water.
Yeah.
Hello, right? So of course they were taking it off.
Yep.
Right? So it wasn't like they were offering themselves. They were like, we got to swim to the boat.
Right, and that's so nails that these guys were like, they're offering
They love
them.
us. They want it.
It's
So like,
stink.
let's be,
Being out there, it's so stink. I'd be like, oh, nee, I just want something on your boat. I don't want you that.
But I mean, then we do know that we have these forms of exchange that grow from that, right? So I also wanted to think about how can we think and talk about those forms of exchange and the ways that women gained access to power by doing that. How do we think about or talk about that without falling into a trap of thinking about prostitution or sex work and just immediately dismissing it? Because I think that gets caught up in a lot of the conversation. And then related to that, which I talk about in the essay, how do we think about sexual expression or sexuality today for Hawaiian women, but for everybody, as something that we want to celebrate or do or explore, rather than trying to confine it or continue to discipline in it the way that the missionaries taught us we needed to discipline it.
That's a really interesting point. I think this also brings me into my question around your use of the term LGBTQM and sort of your ideas. I'm just curious to know your ideas around that and sort of what kind of generative energies have come out of putting mahu in with the acronym.
Yeah, I'm not fully on board with it. I'm not really sure. Sometimes I put mahu in the front, like mahu / LGBTQ, depending on how I feel or what the project is appropriate. I'm kind of in the camp that I don't care much about the acronym, but I know why it's necessary, right? People connect and see themselves in a range of ways, and that's fine. I also wanted us as a lahui or a mahui to not think that just when we talk about sexuality, we're talking about LGBTQ.
Right.
Like, I'm talking about all sexual relationships that we've been constrained to think only look in certain ways, or relationships at all, right? I want us to like explore and think about how relationships, desires, gender changes over someone's life. And so sometimes I also think the acronym kind of holds even gay people in.
Yeah. Oh, that's very, thank you. I love the idea that as Kanaka, our ways of relating to each other change over time based on the conditions and also our proximity to colonialism, and also the allyships and the relationships forged through suffering and joy. So I think I really like it. I thought it was really a generative way of thinking about our Pilina, Hawaiian Kanaka Pilina with the LGBTQ community, and how we can continue to foster that Pilina through our shared histories, right? Because there are shared histories. You share a little bit about this in the 20th century, right? 20th century, around the AIDS crisis here in Hawaii, and sort of the AIDS crisis, but also how that shaped relationships in Hawaii during the 80s between like cultural practitioners and Mahu and LGBTQIA plus folks living here in Hawaii. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that aspect? That the 20th century and the kind of a shift, and then also moving into we can talk about this after. Marriage equality in Hawaii, and also the discourse that started to develop around that. But
yeah, so I had been doing a lot of research on like what happened with AIDS in Hawaii, and when you look at the documents or the newspaper articles about it, there's actually a lot of Hawaiian faces in there that was sort of surprising to me, because my understanding it was a very like hush hush thing. But from the beginning, there were a lot of like Hawaiian politicians, for example, like Governor Waihe'e, like immediately created an AIDS task force. So, once it was here, it was like 1985, I think. So many Hawaiians were involved from the beginning in terms of education and advocacy. The late Abigail Kwananakoa her name is like one of the funders for early Papa'ololokahi stuff.
Wow.
So I saw that, I was like, oh, brah. So I was really glad to see a lot of Hawaiians were involved. But what was interesting later, when I talked to some of the kupuna who I interviewed in the oral history, who were in the hula community, who I can't speak specifically to, but they said like, within the halau, we were told we can't go to certain places. You cannot bring that in here. They talked about how it was really hitting the their community as well as the Hawaiian community, and there was much more heightened awareness of shame around things and fear because of the way that people were existing in community. People were out maybe. But then they were basically told not to do that anymore, or don't be like that. And that created a lot of division, I think, in the community.
That's interesting because the broader political ideas around, and social ideas around AIDS at the time, in contrast with like community organizing here in Hawaii, there must have been a lot of misinformation, a lot of fear, and then again, like, kind of forms of control that were developed again, which again relates back to these penal codes in a sense, even like enforced within halau spaces.
Sure.
That's like kapus almost on bodies. That's so interesting. And then moving into, the marriage equality in Hawaii, you also share a bit about nā mamo, the development of nā mamo, but also pilikia that kind of arises, I think, or I don't know if you particularly talk about the pilikia, but more so the organizing around marriage equality. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that? Yeah.
So nā mamo o Hawaii was LGBTQ organization that developed in the 1990s in response to the same-sex marriage kind of debates that were happening in the 1990s. And I interviewed some of those folks for their oral histories in the book. And what they shared, and they're still around, they have lots to share, was that, they wanted to be a Hawaiian gay presence to show everybody that Hawaiians are gay and we're here, and some of us want to get married, or some of us want our rights. Like, we want to protect our Hawaiian entitlements.
Right.
If I have a wahine who has a homestead, I want to inherit her homestead, right? So being like, these are very pragmatic things that we need to fight for. And what they shared was that sovereignty was really huge at this time in the 90s. Kala Hui Hawaii, a number of other groups were like, whoa, you guys gotta calm down, right? We love you. We're all fighting here. Once we get the Lahui, then you folks can whatever. We don't care, right? It was almost like, why are you making a fuss about that? But from their voices, their perspectives, they're like, you want to just shoo us away or put us in the closet or keep us on the side, and we live next door to you. We are in your family. So it it created another huge rift or division. And it also outed a lot of people who didn't necessarily want to be out. But, Nāmama was out there. They were in the front, showing up for Kanaka and standing in protest against other Kanaka who would come in from churches and things like that and tell them that they're evil and all of that. And that's like the 90s when, it was just called same-sex marriage.
Right.
I think later, by the time we get to marriage equality, civil unions, and then marriage itself, thankfully, it appeared that the conversation was much more different, right? There were many more out Hawaiians kind of at the forefront of that argument. And it, to my knowledge, didn't seem as intense as before. But then there were also people who I think were willing to say more openly, like, maybe marriage is not always the goal.
Right.
So how can we maybe fight for both of these things without erasing each other? Yeah.
Very hoi. Yeah, I think this is important history that needs to be shared more. Because Hawaii kind of led, kind of paved the way for a lot of the rights that we enjoy today. But there's also been a change, I think you point out in the paper, of sentiments perhaps, or there's a kind of a right-leaning, I don't know if you've noticed this, or more of a right-leaning...
I told you I live in Eva, right?
That's true. I want to go back to the colonial frameworks that were kind of imposed here in Hawaii and how those frameworks shape the way Kanaka view themselves as sexual beings, but also as perhaps as citizens too.
So the reason I kind of came to all of this or began researching, especially like the Moe Kolohe laws and things like that, is because I would be like, why are we so colonized around like sex and gender? Like, what is it? So I would have that on one hand, and then on the other hand, I was irritated because people are always saying, Hawaiians are so accepting, or aloha is queer. I mean, I've even seen that. And the kind of way that aloha gets appropriated for LGBT equality, which as I get older, I feel better about. But when I was younger, it really irritated me. And so I was trying to get people to stop saying things like that. And then also stop saying Hawaiians were always queer. I'm like, Hawaiians were not always queer. Queer is like a Western word that it can be a fun word, but it's not. You cannot say that about a Hawaiian in 1820.
Right.
He was queer. I was like, he's not queer. He's not, like stop doing that. And so it became very frustrating for me. And I know your essay works through that around Mahu, which I think is brilliant. So looking back at the colonial period, I began to think more kind of like pragmatically, like, okay, what are the laws? How does this then begin to regulate how Hawaiians move with each other, like literally like move with each other, move in the world, and, how do we arrive here? Or even into the 1990s, like how is that over time? Such a big thing that happened, but kind of overlooked, or maybe just not thought a lot about. Like we've accepted and internalized a lot of norms within ourselves, within our community, around sexuality generally, and then specifically heterosexuality, and then kind of this escalator to marriage and salvation, I guess you could say too.
That's so interesting, though. I do feel that there has been like consistent resistance to being sort of confined sexually. You see examples in, people broke the laws, right? Like, yeah, all the time.
Do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk about that.
Okay, sorry. So there's there's a lot of stuff in the New Pepa. If you search Moe Kolohe in the New Pepa, what I've found so far is maybe like 200 plus, but I think there's more. Especially very early on, there's lots of Moe Kolohe arresting going on. And Moe Kolohe was a broad term because Kanaka found all kinds of ways to kind of get around Moe Kolohe. But then the way they were arrested or caught was that if they were seen sharing a pillow, or a blanket, I should say. Because, frequently people traveled and had to sleep in a house not their own, right? But if they were observed in the night sharing a pillow, it was then kind of grounds enough to arrest this person on a Moe Kolohe charge. And then when they went to court, people would testify to say like, oh no, that's not happening. They did not share the pillow, or he was not there. And then even further, if you look at the Kanawai around Moe Kolohe, it was very specific. Like, the specificity was kind of hilarious. It would say things like, a man can only have, a particular wife. A man cannot marry his wife's sister. A man cannot marry his grandmother. Like, it went into like extreme detail for both men and women. And I was like, what is that saying? That Kanaka were doing all kinds of things. Fine, like I'm not here to necessarily judge it, but the specificity kind of blew me away.
Yeah.
And I also know too that's coming with missionary influence.
Yes.
The marriage laws were very much mirrored after Boston, Massachusetts kind of marriage laws that required women take the name of their husbands, right? In Hawaii, it was the law until like the 1970s that women could not have their own bank account.
Right.
So all of that in Hawaii comes from those early missionary kind of imposed and adopted legal structures.
Wow. I was just thinking about my great-grandmother and how many husbands she had. Like
Mine
that
too.
Right? Like that was of that generation. They had multiple husbands. I mean, it was a way of maybe legalizing their their Pilina with others,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, mine too. And on different islands.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I moved here, then we're here, then we're here.
Right.
And so it's documented, and, we all can, like, search marriage records now, and we can find, like, oh, yeah, this, and this.
Yeah.
So it's very clear that it was not a big deal to Hawaiians, especially early on. And the marriage law is revised, like, 3 different times in the 1800s. Which I also found very interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So then also like redefining what marriage is.
Right.
Right. First, that's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Like making it more and more specific over time.
Yeah. And adultery was, I think, technically illegal in the Penal Code until the 1970s as well, even though it was not enforceable. It became more of a civil court type thing. But early on, adultery up until like the 1880s was enforced. And if you look at the Nunpepa, what becomes very fun to read is that people begin like putting out ho'olaha or advertisements in the paper saying like, my husband is doing this. I'm not responsible for him. He's off with his his whoever, and I'm not responsible.
Cocking
and then they would go back and forth.
Wow.
It was like gossip columns.
That's
it's
interesting.
Very fascinating.
I have seen olalo ho'olaha before. I've never really read them, but that's interesting.
And they say all kinds of stuff like, I'm not responsible for the debts that she incurs, and then this woman would write back and be like, he stole my horse, and all kinds of stuff.
Wow. Interesting. I gotta pay more attention to the olalo ho'olaha.
Yeah, no, the tea is in there.
The tea is in there.
The tea is in there.
I know I saw one of my kupuna basically saying, I didn't give permission for people to farm my land on Maui.
Right.
If you listen, you live. If you don't listen, you die. I'm like, that's hardcore. But I got to pay more attention to those olalo ho'olaha. But anyways, you write about colonialism limiting our imagination of what is possible. Can you give some examples of where you see those limitations most strongly in our lahui today?
I was talking to one of my friends, Miley Arvin,
Yeah.
who read drafts of the essay. And she would say, she's like, I don't think Hawaiians care that much about marriage. And I was like, they do. And she was like, no, I don't know. And I was like, they do. And she was like, well, I don't know. And then it made me think, like, do Hawaiians care about marriage, or do I just think they care about marriage? They do. Would you agree? Are you agreeing with me?
I would say
it's expected.
It's expected, yeah.
Yeah.
The idea of having... Does it mean that they necessarily play by the rule book when it comes to marriage?
No.
I would say no.
Right.
Not all, but
yeah, I mean,
plenty.
Yeah. Obviously, we know not everybody gets married, and you don't have to get married, blah, blah, blah. But I think there should be space to think more openly about what that means, or space to allow the different relationships that form around that, or that relationships look differently. You can have a deep platonic relationship that is sometimes intimate, or intimacy looks different, right? Heoli Osorio teaches that, like, intimacy comes in many shapes, and our kupuna knew that. And somehow we've made the marriage relationship the primary relationship in someone's life, maybe except for like a relationship you have with your children, or things like that. But it's perceived that the marriage relationship should provide everything and you need in your life emotionally. And I think that's deeply constraining for so many reasons and people. And I think we need to broaden that within the lahui, and then even connect to that long-term living arrangements and such. I think it should have wider impacts for how we organize our lives and raise up our keiki and build the lahui that we might want.
Right. Makes me think about the Hawaiian family system in general, always resisting the nuclear family. Though it's funny, language around parents and elders changed a little bit. People started calling their aunties when really it'd be makua before. Things like that changed, but there's still that Hawaiians resisting being kind of confined to just the nuclear family. But I do see a little shift in our generation, sort of where the extended family is kind of losing its importance. I don't know. I've noticed that in my own family, that there's sort of severing of Pilina. I wonder what that's about. Maybe it's just the current social climate. I don't know. But I think a return to, not a return to, that sounds nails, a reorientation to our kinship relations that I think is super, super important. You also emphasize the importance of interrogating all transformations of sexuality, including those that emerged under colonial influence. What might that interrogation look like in practice? It's quite a question.
I mean, it might make me sound more interesting than I am.
Okay.
I'm actually quite very, demure.
Demure.
But almost just like, I kind of, part of me just feels like, in my kind of like perspective and philosophy, that, we're taught lots of things. We're taught who we're supposed to like. We're taught about what kind of desires we're supposed to have, and then how to control those things or manage them. And I just want us to like bust out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Time already.
Yeah. I'm not saying I'm doing anything interesting, but younger people might, or kupuna might. I think we shouldn't be so restraining or constraining to ourselves, I guess, is the way I think about it.
Absolutely. We have so many examples in Mo'olelo of, and Mo'olelo should continue to teach us.
Yeah.
So many examples of just so many, like a vast array of Pilina. And absolutely. Have you engaged in any Mo'olelo recently?
So I recently read Waimea Summer, which I
Waimea
guess
Summer.
is... Have you read Waimea
I haven't,
Summer?
no.
People have been telling me to read it for years, and I finally read it. Oh, and there's all kinds of things going on in this book. John Dominus Holt, he's the genius. They said, everybody always said he's brilliant, that he was this great writer, and I had never read anything, and I finally did, and I was like, oh. So I encourage everybody to read Waimea Summer if you haven't read it. Because, you know, it's like the story, he goes back to his family home on the Big Island from Oahu, and he's kind of like city boy, right? And he goes back and he tells of all his Hawaiian ohana and all of their kind of like ways. And he's made almost sick by the way he's observing his, you know, kind of like native family. But they're sexually free in different ways. You know, they move in different ways, and he talks about it. And there's a character in the story who is kind of, I guess, perceived to be mahu, or kind of mahu-like, or just hypersexual, maybe I should say that. And he dances with all the wahine, and then they also kind of hint that he dances with the men as well.
Interesting.
And he makes him sick, like I said, like he makes the main character writing the story sick, because he doesn't know what to do with this Hawaiian that is like expressive in these ways. So that's the most recent kind of like mo'olelo or story that I've read.
It's interesting though.
That made me think a lot.
Yeah, it kind of ties back into what we're talking about with perceptions of ourselves, and then experiencing those who are embodying ancestral ways can be off-putting sometimes. You know, even talking about sex in the lahui is, I think, can be a little unnerving. You see people kind of squirming, you know, or erotics in general. Even though we're all sexual beings and express it in many different ways, you know, there's still this sort of wall that comes up. But then at the same time, like, we celebrate erotics in our mele all the time, and it's quite explicit, you know, sometimes. And I just think it's so interesting that the many different layers and complexities that compose who we are as Kanaka on a daily.
And I sometimes think like, so we think about the mele and we think about all the kauna and everything, and I'm like, well, then maybe we shouldn't be talking about it like this. Maybe I should not be talking about this. I start to think like, you know, is it more Hawaiian to not talk about it, but to just let it exist? But then I also think there's they're kind of different. So there's like a lifting the veil or whatever and saying like, you know, we are these things. Like, for instance, in the 90s where the gay Hawaiian group was like, no, we are gay, right? We need to say this because we have a political goal, right? Where a lot of people have been like, oh, why are you guys making a fuss?
Right.
You are part of us. And it's like, no, we don't feel like we are.
Right.
So I feel like there are moments of strategy where you have to kind of just say, yeah, no, this is what Hawaiians are, very sexually expressive.
Yeah.
Maybe they are, maybe they're not, depending on where you're at. And then other times being like, no, we're not going to share that.
Yeah.
We're not going to give that. We have our mele for that. We're not going to, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. There's, I guess, a way of like navigating those spaces. That's so interesting. I've never really thought that to myself, like, oh, perhaps this is something that should be written in kauna versus like just ahuvale and just like laid bare for everyone to sort of interact with. But at the same time, I recognize the importance of you know, the political importance of being able to share these stories and talk about sex and erotics in general.
I like that you're saying erotics. No, because I haven't heard that word in, you know, a little bit, and so I'm glad you brought it in.
It's a great word.
It is.
It's a wonderful word. I think it's a beautiful word. It's like in our podcast, we're trying to, you know, bring in conversations around the erotics of our people. I think that's a really important conversation. Something that I feel like there's a lot of shame around, right? So trying to unmoor ourselves from or at least have conversations where we're unmooring ourselves from that shame and finding ways to, connect back to a movement or a feeling or a vibe, reorient ourselves in ways to the vital energies that come from these expressions and ways of knowing and relating to one another.
Can I say something about the erotic real quick?
Please.
Well, so I'm a nerd, but like, Audre Lorde's essay about the erotic, it's not just like sex, right? As you said, a vibe. In her essay on it, she talks about the erotic as being the joy she experienced sitting next to the woman she loves in the sun. Just like the simplicity of being able to be with those you have affection for. Or I think she also talks about like making a meal for her ohana, or building a bookshelf, right? Like these simple things that bring so much joy and require a kind of care is erotic. Erotic is, when I hear the word erotic, I think of the Madonna song.
Yeah.
Erotic. But thinking of erotic as this vibe, this kind of like thoughtful thing that you can experience that gives you like pleasure,
and it kind of being a movement, a way of moving through the world. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing about Audre Lorde. Noel also shared a little bit about Audre Lorde, who was also really influential, I think, in my undergrad experience. Sister Outsider, collection of essays. Brilliant. I have to read because Akea wrote these juicy questions, and I'm just like, let's see. Which question shall we ask Lani next? Oh, this is a good one. Can you talk about the relationship between kuleana and intimacy? What it means to imagine Pilina not through the lens of ownership or regulation, but through responsibility and connection. It's juicy.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I've never thought before about kuleana and intimacy.
Yeah, we can try and create something
I can get there. Well, both things take work, I think. Like kuleana is a thing that you don't just have it. You have to keep it, and I don't mean it like in a ownership way, but if you're not heeding that kuleana, it can go away, right? So that it requires work, it requires care, nurturing, etc. And so I feel like intimacy is like that too. I mean, intimacy can come rather quickly and move on, but long-term intimacy requires care and work.
Yeah.
That is not always fun.
Right.
Intimacy is not always like joy.
It's not.
It certainly is not. But both things require showing up and committing to the thing, right? The project, right? And that's like ohana, right? And it's something you just have to continue to do if that's what you want to do.
Right.
And so it's a different kind of, I think, understanding of something like marriage, for instance, that peoples can be engaged in when they all agree to it. Yeah.
I know. I'm thinking about Kamalani shared the other day that kuleana is something that we awamo. It's something that you wanting access to perhaps a place or access to a certain set of knowledge or even a relationship with a person. The kuleana only grows as you get closer and closer to that person, which is also kind of an erotic idea as well. But I think that's I just think it's a really interesting way of thinking about intimacy, having this idea of kuleana, which associated with it or being a part of that conversation, I think is pretty generative
it's like
it's totally that. Gotta stew on it for a little bit more. Well, we are toward the end of our Kūkā, and I just have to mahalo you for just sharing so much ike about just about so many things. I mean, I could go down the list, but it's really nice that you know your shit and are able to really articulate some of these really complex laws and relations and histories. So mahalo. I think closing, I generally ask our guests to share a momi, or a pearl of wisdom, something that you weren't able to share in our conversation, something that I might have missed, anything at all. And you can take your time in thinking about it. There's no rush.
So it's just a very tiny thing, which I think has a big significance. So one of the kupuna that I interviewed for the project, Navahine Duruwa, over time we talk on the phone and things like that. And a few months ago I was talking on the phone with her because the book was coming out. And then, we also kind of diverted to talk about the politics of the day and
Right.
frustrations and things like that. And I was expressing to her my frustrations with the government. And in her kind of like kupuna ike, she just said, "Don't worry, my dear."
Oh,
They call you dear.
yeah.
She said, "Don't worry, my dear. The pua is just beginning to bloom." And I was like, "Okay, mahalo." And then I was like, "Oh." Like,
That's so wise.
no.
The pua is just beginning
so
to
I've
bloom.
been saying it because I just feel like it brings in so much. It reminds us that, in spite of all the weeds and things, the pua is going to bloom. And to her mind, she's like, it's just beginning.
It's just beginning.
So I've been using that to kind of share and
to ground.
put us in a good place.
Absolutely. That's a very wise. I was just thinking about how flowers are very resilient and they're able to bloom in the toughest conditions. They're able to bloom at night, some of them, or even in winds and rains and lack of sun and whatever, the pua gonna bloom.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's really beautiful. Oh, I want to hang out with the kupuna you hang out with.
They are fun. They're everywhere and they're out. They
and
want
about.
to. Yeah.
Yeah, I just saw a kupuna recently interviewed. I was going through Instagram. I don't remember their name, but they talked about their relationship to their kupuna and how their kupuna just affirmed them after they were being bullied, that they are beautiful and loved, and just the ano and the energy of this kupuna it reminded me so much of my childhood and being around other kupuna Hawaiʻi, and how they always have these pearls of wisdom that they impart, they want to share, and it's just not everyone's there to listen or always willing to listen, so we got to make time to really sit with them and ho'olohe pono and stuff. So it's awesome you got to do that. Where can we find more of your work?
At your local native bookstore.
Okay, native bookstore. In Hawaii, we have native books.
Yes, at Native Books Hawaii. The physical books. My work mostly is I teach at the University of Hawaii at Manoa.
Come take a class.
People can take my classes. I'm happy when people sit in as well. Like, I'm very open to that. And then, the recordings, the oral history recordings through the Center for Oral History.
Okay.
That's not my work, but it is the wonderful ike of the kupuna that I did interview for the project.
Oh, awesome. So just real quick before we end, what classes are you teaching?
So I regularly teach a queer theory course that very much integrates Hawaii and oceanic perspectives. In fact, it centers those perspectives and how we think of queer theory, not just as this Western thing. And then I teach an Indigenous feminisms course that looks at mostly oceanic and then North America Indigenous feminist movements for land and peace and freedom,
Wow.
justice,
We need more courses like that.
water.
Wow. Well, Lani, mahalo nui
Mahalo
for taking the time to
having
just
me.
wala'au with us today. It's been an honor. I learned so much. I always do when I talk story with you. So mahalo for joining us today.
Mahalo to you for inviting me. I'm very excited for the special issue as well.
Me too.
It's an honor to be a part of it, and then to see it actually exist. I think it says a lot about kind of where we're going.
The flowers just began to bloom. Yeah. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui for sipping the tea on Kūkā Kīkī. Until next time, e inu I ka wai I ke kupuna, a e hoʻohainu I ka waha moʻopuna. Aloha.